God loves the LGBTQIA community. Jesus said, "For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth." Eunuchs are typically men who are castrated. So they could have been born that way, like intersex, or asexual. And there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, typically made eunuchs by the king or emperor, so that the eunuchs can take care of their concubines without the fear of them raping or forming any other relationships with the concubines. There are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, celibate, like priests, like people who made a vow of chastity. Let anyone accept this who can. So if you ever doubted if God loves you, he does, and you were born that way, and there's nothing wrong with you. So now we're going to talk about trans issues. This is a very complex topic, and I'm not here to tell you what to believe or not to believe. I am merely sharing how I think about these things to help you formulate your own opinion about the topic, and hopefully give you some things to think about that you've never considered before, or some things to research to learn more about the topic. A lot of people were talking about trans issues, and I'm sorry to say that the church, when they tackle trans issues, it's just not right. In my other church, there was this Focus in the Family magazine that was horrifying, actually. I think it was Focus in the Family, some magazine, where it was like interviewing the parent of a trans child or trans person, and this parent was just really conflicted about the fact that their child had to go through transitioning and they feel like they were mutilating their body and stuff like that. Actually, I want to talk about plastic surgery along with this topic as well because it does tie back into it. This topic is very complex and has a lot of nuances to it, right? So we'll just simplify it real quick. There's a lot of confusion in the world of Christianity in terms of trans. And the common attitude towards trans people is to say that they are just doing this for the flesh. Like you're altering what you're born with, what God made you as, because of some human justification for it. And so they would equate that to mutilating your body and mutilating the home of the Holy Spirit, right? So we have to clarify what the experience of trans people is. So trans people are born with the opposite brain, right? So there's cis and trans. Cis is like you're born woman and you feel like a woman. Let's just say you have like a female brain. And if you're trans, then you're born a woman and then you have like a male brain. That, like, let's say that's oversimplification, but that's what it is, right? And so if you think of it that way, then when they look at the mirror, they have gender dysphoria and they don't feel like what they are in their mind is the same as what they see in the mirror. And so it makes them want to change so that they don't have that incongruence. When people actually recognize that in themselves is hard to say. Why the controversy is in this topic is because of the ability of minors to actually undergo gender affirming hormone therapy and surgeries on all these kinds of things, right? So who's to say they even know that they are trans? So that's why there are states that are actually banning the ability of minors to undergo gender affirming treatments. My stance is the outlier is that very well may be children who know that they are trans from a very young age. That may be true. And the easiest way to say is that the government should not even have a say in regards to what should be legal or illegal about this matter. What they should be doing is requiring every patient to undergo extensive therapy prior to undergoing gender affirming treatments. And that is what the government is supposed to be doing, as opposed to actually blatantly banning it and saying, hey, minors are not allowed to undergo gender affirming treatments. It really should be about the parents, the therapists, the patient, trans kid, and also their doctors who's going to be performing these gender affirming treatments. And that's basically it. It should not be under the law as to what is right or wrong. But it's because these lawmakers feel like it's getting out of hand. There are a lot of children who are undergoing gender reassignment surgeries and stuff like that. And they feel like it's not okay. I think the data is not that clear. I have looked into the data into how many people are detransitioning, and this is based on survey, by the way. So it's not like, a clinical study or anything like that. This is like surveying trans people over the spectrum, when they transition, how old were they, when they detransition. So basically, like, you're a female, you went to male, and then you went back to female because you're like, oops, I changed my mind. I am actually not trans. So detransitioning. So the data is not very clear as to it being like, oh, most of the children who transitioned changed their minds when they hit a certain age, like in their 20s and stuff, and realized that they are not actually trans and they detransition. It's not as clear cut. If it was, then good. It's like, well, look, there's data, there's your evidence, done, right? And I say that is because it's better if the children, along with their parents, their doctors, their therapists, can actually make a plan that is safe for them, because it is a real risk that children are killing themselves because of the feelings that comes with being trans. And what I would say, though, as to why I think that it's okay, that the first step for minors should really be just therapy and open communication with their therapists and their parents and all that kind of stuff, is because you have all the time in the world to transition. And the thing is, transitioning does not solve all of your problems. If you had a traumatic childhood, like, this is now talking about transitioning in general, not even about children, but anybody who wants to transition or feels the need to transition. The first step should really be therapy, even though you feel like you're confident that you're trans based on all of your reasoning. The first step is really therapy, because you're thinking that transitioning or you not being the right sex in your mind is the answer to all of your problems, right? And you'll find that transition doesn't solve all of your problems. After you transition, go through that whole process. It's a very grueling process. Once you get out of it and you've healed fully and you're totally happy with how you look like and all that kind of stuff, everything you have suffered is still there, right? Like the anxiety, the trauma, probably the PTSD, the depression, whatever it is that you were struggling prior to transitioning would still be there if you did not address it in therapy prior to transitioning. And I say this is because people who were trans, they feel like, hey, this is a magic pill. Like, once I transition, like, all of my problems stem from the fact that it's because I'm trans and people don't accept that I am. And then da 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 da, right? And once I transition, everything will be okay. Then you find that it's not true. And then what do you do then? Right. Well, you can start therapy and then you realize, oh, I'm actually not trans and I don't feel comfortable being trans. And now I want to detransition after I have sorted out all of my problems and gotten the right tools from my therapist about all of these things. And now I have seen everything in a clear light. What are the pros of children transitioning early if they're really sure? One, if they're suicidal, then okay, if it saves them from killing themselves, great. And my understanding is, if you take the hormone therapy sooner, right, before puberty, then you won't really have the development of breasts, so the transition will be smoother. It'll look like you can pass better, right? you know all these kinds of things, right? It definitely is an interesting topic, and I would not say that I understand it completely, even though I came from a psychology background. I'm just saying that is very nuanced, just like any psychological topic. It's very nuanced, and everybody has to come up with their own conclusions for themselves. And for children, it is safer for them to go through the process of getting therapy early on to reconcile all of these things within themselves and get the tools to manage all the feelings and thoughts and all that kind of stuff prior to actually entering into transitions. And that will happen like after 18, I guess, in whatever your state is. I would say 18 or 21. Especially since your brain is still developing and people change all the time, right? Like, if you're a teenager, you feel like you know everything about the world and you're sure about who you are and all kinds of stuff. But there really is a lot of things to learn and a lot of growing to do. And it's very interesting indeed. Another thing that I was thinking of actually was, this goes back into the whole incident about the trans woman in the bathroom who has not transitioned fully. So she had a male presenting body in the women's locker room and she wanted to be naked along with all the women, female presenting bodies. And naturally, the women were not comfortable with a male presenting body in the women's locker room. And you can say that, hey, this is transphobic and it's discrimination. But the reality is that it's a very complex issue. Like, I don't feel comfortable being naked in the women's locker room. I think that is weird. Okay. I always have my whole outfit on. You will not see me naked anywhere in public. I think that is fully weird, but I am the weird one in that context, right? So for me to be comfortable, I would like to be fully clothed in the women's locker room. And in my opinion, nobody should be naked in the women's locker room. It makes me really uncomfortable seeing naked bodies walking around. Like, what the heck, right? So in this context, I would be the weird one. And that's okay. You just go with it. So I just go to the shower and put on my clothes before I exit the shower. So I am fully clothed in and out. I mean, that's totally fine. And so for a trans person, and if you have not transitioned fully and you have a male presenting body, if you don't plan to transition, which you don't have to, by the way, we should actually talk about the definition of trans. I forgot to talk about that. You don't necessarily have to undergo gender affirming treatments. You don't have to do the hormones. You don't have to do the top surgery, the bottom surgery. You don't have to do any surgery if you don't want to. And that doesn't negate the fact that you feel like you're a woman. Right? So you could very well be a male presenting body and just wear drag and present as a woman with like a prosthesis and all of these things. And nobody would say you're not a woman. You're still a woman because that's what it is, right? You don't have to force yourself to undergo surgery if it's unsafe for you. But then that's something you have to work with as a therapist because it's just hard to not see your physical body as you see it in your mind. Right? But anyway, so that's the context of it. So that doesn't negate anything. So great. We have that understanding. So I was thinking about this and I was like, well, if you grew up as a girl, okay, there's a lot of things that society tells you. Not to say that society is right. There are just things that you are raised with. And as a girl in society, they want you to be more demure. They want you to be just like a lady. Stereotypically a lady. Okay. And there are things that you have to deal with grace, and you can't be aggressive in dealing with these things, all of that stuff, right? Assertive, polite, respectful, and blah blah blah. Okay, it's just like female mannerisms that you have to learn to fit into society, basically, right? Not to say society is right, but that's how we were raised. And if you were raised as a boy, you have to understand being raised as a boy and being raised as a girl, usually they're not the same experience. There are a lot of things that girls are not allowed to do. There are not a lot of things that boys are not allowed to do. And if you were raised as a boy from the get go, you have boy attitudes. Like you tackle the world with what boys are allowed to do. So, in this context of the swimmer, the trans woman in the bathroom that wants to be naked along with all of the other women, if you were really raised as a girl, you yourself would just consider you to be different. You're just like, well, I'm the weird one here. So the normal response as a girl would be the one who would change to fit in, right? You won't just go like, well, this is what I want to do, and so this is what I'm gonna do. You actually go like, well, I don't want people to feel uncomfortable, and I'm uncomfortable, so I'll just do whatever it is to not make any waves. Because women are not very competitive, like naturally, right? So you're more of like, we want to work with each other and help each other and all these kind of things. So I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. So to do that, I will basically change in the shower, right? All of these things. So that's another thing to think about in this trans issue. I know that there are a lot of talk about trans issues these days, and that's good because society is trying to find ways to accommodate, but we can't really be too extreme about it. And I found the school's response towards this issue really extreme when they said that, hey, if you as a woman are uncomfortable with having a trans woman in the bathroom naked with you, or in the locker room, then you're the one who is going to face consequences. You're the one who's going to lose your scholarship. You're the one who needs to seek therapy. I thought that was a really extreme response because there was nothing wrong with how they felt. That's just how the majority feels about this thing. So we're not being transphobic. That is the thing. People like to say that these attitudes are transphobic because they feel like you are treating them as other, but it's not transphobic. And we're not all the same, regardless, anyway. So I, as an example, I feel very uncomfortable. And if the world was my way, then nobody would be naked in the locker room. But the world is not my way. Okay, right? So as a cis woman, I would say that. So as a trans woman, you have to consider other people's feelings as well. And can't just be you. I'm sorry. And that doesn't mean that people are transphobic. That just means that as a society to work well together, we have to actually consider other people's feelings, right? Anyway, there are a lot of things that people label as transphobic, which I find like ridiculous. If you're a lesbian and you don't want to date a trans woman, I know a trans woman is a woman, there's no difference. And then they say, hey, you're transphobic because you don't want to date a trans woman. I'm gonna say, hey, it's a preference. Okay, just like I prefer to date a certain type doesn't mean I am against all the other types. If I prefer to date within my race, doesn't mean I'm racist, right? There's just, it's a ridiculous statement considering how there are a lot of things you have to consider when choosing a partner, okay? And there are a lot of things that you have to tackle when dating a trans woman. Yes, they're a woman, doesn't negate anything. And I'm just saying, there are people who can handle the baggage and there are people who cannot. All right? And you can't just force people and call people transphobic because they don't have the bandwidth to deal with that, right? And that's just preference, and it's not transphobic. Transphobia is like hating on them, ostracizing them, calling them names, making them feel bad for who they are, saying that it's not okay to be who they are, forcing them to be in a different bathroom because they're trans and you feel like they're gonna stare at you because it's just a man that's playing dress up and in your locker room just to leer at you. Very transphobic. Just because they're male presenting bodies doesn't mean that they are male. But then it's hard too, right? It's hard because there are predators, sexual predators who could very well dress up as a woman or whatever and say that they are a trans woman, even though they're not, with nefarious agenda. They're there to like rape you or something. so so that's why society has to have these conversations and actually come up with a solution that is fair to everybody and not like, oh, I'm afraid of being sued and being called transphobic, so I'm just gonna let everything slide. It's ridiculous. And it's good that we're having this talk. It's a very complex topic. And I'm not gonna pretend like I have answers to any of this. It's very complex. And I have trans friends. And it's very individual. And I know that the world just wants to make everything all black and white, but I'm sorry, nothing really is black and white. Nothing is black and white in science, in medicine. Everything is very nuanced. Everything is very individual. Even treating cancer is individual. Not everybody has the same response. Not everybody undergoes the same treatment and procedures. And everything is just all nuance. And to say that is not the case is not true. Okay, it's just complicated. Actually, I want to talk about plastic surgery along with this topic as well because it does tie back into it. It's quite interesting how in the Christian community, plastic surgery is totally fine. You don't hear them saying, hey, you're sinning because you did plastic surgery. We work with plastic surgery a lot because of breast surgery. So to remove the cancer in your breast, an option is to get implants or they get fat from some other part of your body, like usually the abdomen, and then they would put it on your breast and they would take skin flap from your abdomen and put it on your breast. Stuff like that. So plastic surgery is very important in terms of those kinds of reasons, right? For cancer, for burn victims and all kinds of stuff. So now, how come it is okay for people to undergo surgery for no reason at all, right? Just because they want to. And yet it's like horrifying to have trans people undergo plastic surgery. And then you're going to say, well, it's because one is necessary and one is not. Actually, out of all the necessity, it's more necessary for the trans person to undergo surgery if it saves their life compared to somebody who just wants to augment their breast, not for any medical reason, like it's too big and it's hurting her back and she can barely walk, and she's totally crippled, but more like, oh, I have small breasts and I think it'll be cuter for me to have big breasts, right? you know? Have you ever heard anybody against that in church? I have not.